They said that the A-10 was obsolete. It wasn't stealthy. It was too old. It couldn't be a tool in modern warfare. An Iranian militia just found out that all of this talk is nonsense, and it found out the hard way. An A-10 flew overhead and the entire militia could see it coming. Then they heard, and they knew there was nothing they could do. It's an A-10 Armageddon, as the US Air Force's Old Faithful just delivered pure destruction to Iran. This time, the US A-10 Warthog didn't hit a target in Iran, it struck Iraq. On March 25th, an A-10 flew to the Al-Anbar province in Iraq to launch a devastating attack on the Habbaniyah base in that country. That base is located about 50 miles from Baghdad, and it houses soldiers from the Iraqi military. But hold on a second, the US is at war with Iran, not Iraq, so why is an A-10 crossing the border into Iraq? Well, the answer lies in 3 words: Popular Mobilization Forces, or PMF. Now, this is the Iran-backed militia that has joined members of the Iraqi military at the base that the US just struck, and America's A-10 has just wiped them off the map. Footage has already emerged from the strike, and it provides an interesting view of the A-10 in action. We see the US warplane flying high above the base it targeted, and for a few seconds, it almost seems like the A-10 is cruising. Then we hear the telltale BRRRRRT. That's the A-10 rattling off dozens of rounds from its 30mm GAU-8 Avenger cannon at the base, and that one volley of fire is all that it took. Based on what we've seen in the footage, it looks like the A-10 is taking a high-angle attack shot based on how it's seen in the sky. And this isn't a low-angle strike. The A-10 isn't close to the ground. This tells us is that the Iraqi militia base likely has man-portable air defense systems, or manpads, and the A-10 needed to stay high so they wouldn't be a threat. The high-angle approach worked. The A-10 rattled off its shots, and the Iranian militia was ripped to shreds. Iran's PMF forces tried to respond to the terrifying threat that was overhead, and more footage shared on X shows that they wheeled out a Zu-23-2 autocannon in a desperate attempt to take the A-10 down before it could do what it came to do. Now, this is one of the anti-aircraft systems, but it's hardly the best choice for dealing with the US attack aircraft. The Zu-23-2 is a Soviet-era towered anti-aircraft gun. And when we say Soviet era, we mean the very early era, in terms of the Soviet military building. This is a gun that was designed in the late 1950s, and is only capable of providing low-altitude air defense. At one point in time, it was among the world's most widely used air defense systems, but today, the twin-barreled 23mm guns mounted to the Zu-23-2 aren't capable of dealing with modern airframes. Of course, the A-10 isn't exactly modern, as there have been calls for its retirement that we'll be getting into shortly. But all it had to do was take the high-angle attack route we mentioned earlier, and that was all she wrote for the PMF forces at the Habbaniyah base. BRRRRT echoed in the skies, and those forces were ripped apart by the A-10. The Iraqi Defense Ministry has already detailed the damage. They've confirmed that the A-10 strike hit the Habbaniyah base's engineering building's medical facility, taking out 2 key components needed to keep the base running. The PMF would have been crying out for those destroyed medical facilities, as the A-10 also caused plenty of casualties. The Defense Ministry claims that 7 Iraqi army soldiers have been killed, along with another 13 being wounded. It's unclear if those were members of the PMF or the official Iraqi military, but it almost doesn't matter. Iraq brought this on itself by giving the go-ahead to the PMF to use the Habbaniyah base, and it has now paid the price. Now, it might seem a little crazy that the US has extended Operation Epic Fury outside Iran. However, it starts to make sense when you realize that the US is now in a phase where it has achieved almost total air superiority over Iran, and it is now doing everything that it can to minimize the threat being presented to American troops. Those soldiers are still operating in the Persian Gulf region, where they've switched their focus to reopening the Strait of Hormuz, and allowing Iran-backed militia groups to be rogue in other countries creates a threat from outside of Iran. So, the US has to counter that threat, and it's here where things could get more serious in Operation Epic Fury, as Iran's militias have yet to really make their mark in the war. Now, one of the key challenges of fighting against Iran is that you're not only dealing with that country and its military. Iran has backed militias all over the Middle East and Gulf region to create a proxy network of fighters that it can call upon to extend its influence and respond with asymmetric attacks whenever Iran itself comes under threat. And some of these you may already know about. There is Hezbollah in Lebanon, which has slowly been working to take control over that country. though Israel's war with Hamas in Palestine has caused issues with that work, as the Israeli Defense Force has also attacked Hezbollah at various points. Hezbollah is very much involved in the current fighting, as it launched missiles at central Israel at around the same time as news broke of the A-10 strike against the PMF. And by the way, Hamas is another of the Iran-backed militias, as are the Houthis in Yemen, who spent much of 2024 and some of 2025 making the Red Sea as dangerous for merchant ships as Iran is now making the Strait of Hormuz. The Houthis are on the verge of doing the same thing again, as they have threatened to close the Red Sea in the wake of Operation Epic Fury. Through these militia groups, Iran has spent years being the bully of the Middle East. These groups gave Iran plausible deniability. Almost everybody knows that they're being funded by Iran's regime, but the militias allowed Iran to launch attacks without getting its own hands dirty. Plus, they extended Iran's reach to other nations, essentially allowing it to create something of a proxy empire that it can unleash just as we're starting to see now, about a month into Operation Epic Fury and Operation Roaring Lion. Yemen, Lebanon, and Palestine are all being impacted by these militias, and as we can see with the PMF, portions of Iraq are also under Iran's sway. It isn't quite accurate to call the PMF a single militia group. The PMF is more dangerous than that, as the London School of Economics and Political Science points out. It says that the PMF is actually an umbrella organisation under which there are between 50 and 70 separate militia groups that split their focus between at least 3 different entities. Iran is one of them, though the PMF has also attempted to make inroads into ingratiating itself into Iraq's military and to establish itself as a separate arm of the Iraqi state, much as the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, has done in Iran. Now, it seems likely that the IRGC is the organisation that provides the financial backing, along with some of the military muscle, that the PMF needs. As for Iraq, it seems to have a love-hate relationship with the PMF. On the one hand, groups that fall under the PMF umbrella have clashed with Iraq's government, as we saw when a couple of brigades from the Shia Popular Mobilization Forces stormed Iraq's Ministry of Agriculture in July 2025. But on the other hand, Iraq has passed laws allowing the PMF to operate in its territory, and, according to the Washington Institute, Iraqi state funding has been on the rise for the group. The same outlet says that the PMF was originally given state blessing to take Iraqi territory back from the Islamic State, which has led to this mingling with the Iraqi government. It seems that Iraq's government built a rod for its own back with these decisions to allow the PMF's power to grow. But we mentioned earlier that Iraq brought the US A-10 attack on itself, and this isn't the reason why. The situation with the PMF has escalated. Now, before we tell you how, this is a quick side note to remind you that you're watching The Military Show. And if you're getting valuable insight from the channel, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you never miss a video. Now, Iraq made a mistake at Habbaniyah. That's according to the Times of Israel, which reported on March 24th that Iraq's National Security Council had authorized the PMF to exercise the right of self-defense and respond to any attacks targeting their positions, the outlet says. What amounts to a green light for Iranian-backed PMF operations on Iraq's territory followed an earlier attack on the PMF headquarters that killed at least 15 fighters and left a PMF commander dead. A day later, the footage emerged of America's A-10 Warthog sending its bullets flying at the Habbaniyah base. And a day after that, we learned of 7 more deaths and 13 casualties. Now, as strange as it may sound, what we may be seeing from the US here is the rattling off of some warning shots. Iraq's government giving permission to the PMF to defend itself is the latest example of this Iran-backed grouping of militias ingratiating itself into Iraq's national structure. The US doesn't want to see that happen. The more influence that the PMF gains in Iraq, the more likely that nation is to fight alongside Iran on Operation Epic Fury. So, the A-10 and its 30mm cannons may have been giving Iraq a taste of what's to come if it gives the PMF too much power. Alternatively, and far more simply, the US wanted to strike a blow against one of the many Iranian militias that are stationed throughout the Middle East, and it chose one that is in a country close enough to Iran to present a threat to US forces. After all, Iraq has a small coast on the Persian Gulf, and its position to the west of Iran means that PMF forces in Iraq may be capable of striking US forces trying to operate in the Strait of Hormuz. This is the issue behind the initial problem. The US is trying to stop the situation in the Strait of Hormuz from escalating. Iran has been trying to lock up that crucial waterway ever since Operation Epic Fury began, and it's been doing a pretty good job of it. According to the United Nations, around 20,000 merchant vessels are now stranded outside the Strait of Hormuz, as Iran has been using everything in its arsenal, from drones and anti-ship missiles to fast boats loaded with guns and explosives, to make that strait too dangerous to cross. Iran has been allowing some ships through, however it is only granting passage to those that it defines as non-hostile ships, which amounts to vessels that neither participate nor support acts of aggression against Iran. Ships that have any ties to the US are being blockaded and, in some cases, attacked. And the same goes for merchant vessels flying the flags of any countries that have even a small positive relationship with the US. Iran is basically saying that any merchant ship from a nation that isn't a direct and enthusiastic ally of Iran is in danger. And this is a major problem for the US, especially if it views Operation Epic Fury as a long-term campaign that is designed to remove Iran's regime from power. In peacetime, the Strait of Hormuz plays a critical role in the global oil and gas industries. The BBC says that about 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas passes through this single waterway every year. It being choked off has led to massive price shocks in those industries, which is where we're seeing Iran play the one major card that it has against the US. Even as Iran's military infrastructure is shattered on land, it's still able to deploy weapons, particularly its fast boats, to seal up the Strait of Hormuz. These fast boats are difficult to counter. They're often little more than speedboats that have been loaded with weapons, meaning they're fast enough and powerful enough to reach and hurt merchant ships. Once they've scored hits, they scurry away back into hiding. Now, no one is using these fast boats to attack US warships, but that isn't the point. Iran is able to conceal small ports all across the Strait of Hormuz coast, and it has been using those ports to unleash its fast boats, leading to an asymmetric kind of blockade that is successful because no merchant ship captain wants to take the risk of sailing when these boats are around. Nick Brown from Jane's, which is a defense intelligence company, tells the BBC that Iran could, in theory, keep this type of threat up indefinitely. Iranian forces are well practiced in decoy, camouflage, and subterfuge tactics. Many of their smaller weapons can be disguised in commercial vehicles, hidden in buildings and out of sight along Iran's long coastline, Brown notes. Adding the PMF operating out of Iraq into that mix is the last thing that the US wants to allow to happen. Granted, Iraq's Persian Gulf coast is only 58 kilometers, or around 36 miles long, but it's located to the north of the Persian Gulf, meaning the US has to bypass the Strait of Hormuz to get there. And this is without considering the possibility that the PMF could start launching drones and anti-ship missiles from Iraq's territory to hit ships in the Strait of Hormuz. So, the A-10 taking flight in Iraq wasn't just about taking out a PMF base. It was also about letting Iran know that the US is willing to deal with its proxy forces, especially if they have a chance to present a threat in the Strait of Hormuz. Now, sticking with that strait for a moment, would you like to guess which US aircraft has been deployed to that strait to counter what Human Rights Watch calls Iran's war crime of attacking merchant ships with fast boats and drones? If you answered the A-10, then give yourself a pat on the back. What is clearly among the most versatile airframes in the US arsenal is also being deployed to the Strait of Hormuz, where it has been strafing Iran's fast boats with the very same 30mm cannons that it used to tear through the PMF base in Iraq. General Dan Kane, who is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, confirmed this on March 19th, when he said, "The A-10 Warthog is now in flight across the southern flank and is hunting and killing fast attack watercraft in the Straits of Hormuz." Now, these A-10s are being joined by Apache helicopters, which allow the US to deploy low-altitude firepower in the Strait of Hormuz. The A-10 is perfect for this kind of job. It was originally built to conduct the close-range destruction of ground and surface targets, such as mechanized units, in support of ground forces. Attacking fast boats in the Strait of Hormuz is a little different from that task, but the key here is that the A-10 can fly low enough to get within cannon range of those boats, and it can then shred them quickly and far more cost-effectively than a fighter jet that has to stay high and can only rattle off expensive missiles at those boats. Now, by now, it's clear that the A-10 has become one of the most important airframes that the US has as it moves into the next phase of Operation Epic Fury. But here's something crazy. Many in the US military structure have been calling for the retirement of the A-10 for years. And as Defense One points out, some in the US have argued that the A-10 should be retired to allow the US Air Force to pivot more toward airframes that allow it to compete with China and Russia. And the same outlet even notes the F-35, which itself proved very effective during the early days of Operation Epic Fury due to its stealth capabilities, was once pitched as a direct replacement for the A-10. But as American A-10s are taking out Iranian militia bases and proving themselves very effective in the Strait of Hormuz, these calls surely have to die down. The reality is that the A-10, despite the fact that it was introduced way back in 1976, is still an extremely effective aircraft when deployed in a region where the US has established air superiority. That's precisely what America has achieved in Iran, and based on the ancient anti-air weapons the PMF tried to use against the A-10 that struck its base in Iraq, the US doesn't have much to worry about on the air defense front when attacking isolated Iraqi militia bases. The A-10 is an airframe with a lethal cannon that is also capable of carrying up to 7,200 kilograms or 16,000 pounds of mixed ordnance that includes bombs, both dumb and guided, missiles, rockets, flares, and chaff. And the national interest adds that the A-10's long service history, along with its many exploits in conflict since the 1970s, makes the case for it being the most successful airframe in the US arsenal. Now sure, it's old. It's not as fast as many of America's fighter jets, and it doesn't have the stealth capabilities of an F-35 or a B-2 bomber. But when faced with an enemy that either has a destroyed air defense network, such as Iran, or an unsophisticated one, such as the PMF, well, the A-10 is still a very capable aircraft. America's A-10s aren't quite ready to fly off into the sunset just yet. They're far too busy taking out bases, destroying fast boats, and proving to Iran and its militias that there is still plenty of life left in an airframe that some have labeled obsolete. And by the way, we mentioned earlier that Apache helicopters have joined the A-10s in the Strait of Hormuz, and that they add to the low-altitude firepower that the US is bringing to bear against Iran's fast boats. Those attack helicopters are hitting Iran hard with Hellfire missiles and powerful chain guns, and they bring a lot more to the Strait than these weapons alone. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show so you don't miss any of our coverage of Operation Epic Fury.